Good morning, everybody. It's great to be back in Delaware. It's like sort of my second home over here. My first job ever in my life was picking up trash in Fenwick Island way back in the early 1960s. I managed to move my way up to be a lifeguard at Bethany Beach, which was, we enjoyed that a little more, I must say. But it's great to be here, and we're going to talk a little bit this morning about sustainable communities, complete communities, and so on and so forth. I want to start off, some of you may have heard my talks before. I always like to tell a little story about how I got interested in land use planning and urban design. It goes all the way back to the middle of the Vietnam War. I was a young second lieutenant in the United States Army. I had just finished jungle warfare training. I was getting ready to go off to a small fire base in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. And literally about 1 week before I'm supposed to go, I get a call from the Pentagon, and I have a colonel on the other end of the line. He's with the Personnel Division. He says to me, "Lieutenant McMahon, do you have any interest in being reassigned to Germany?" And I'm like, okay, let me think about that, like Germany or Vietnam. I said, yes, Germany sounds very exciting. I would love to go to Germany. And I got very, very lucky. I was sent to Heidelberg, West Germany, which in those days, and still is the headquarters for the U.S. military in Europe. I was assigned as an aide to a U.S. general, and I spent the next 2.5 years of my life traveling all over Europe in a helicopter. And that experience completely and totally changed my life. But I didn't realize quite how much it would change my life until I flew home to Birmingham, Alabama, where I grew up, and I got out of the airplane and drove to my house, and for the first time ever, I saw the American landscape with a completely different set of eyes. Because, ladies and gentlemen, to travel is to learn. And that's really what we try to do at the Urban Land Institute. We are focused on trying to foster best practices in land use and development by learning what's working and what's not working, both from this country and from around the world. At ULI, we try to provide leadership in the responsible use of land, and in my work, we spend a lot of time talking about this issue of sustainable development. Now, some people misunderstand this concept. They certainly don't remember this definition. So I always like to say, well, people say, well, what is sustainability? Well, it's really this. It's about our children. It's about our grandchildren. It's about the future, and it's about planning for the future. It's also about balance, harmony. It's about the relationship, if you will, between conservation and economic development. It's about the relationship between the built environment and the natural environment. It's about the relationship between people and the land. It's also about trying to find win-win solutions to the problems that face us today. I believe, and I think the Urban Land Institute believes, we spend way too much time in America fighting about what we disagree about, and not nearly enough time sitting down together to talk about what we do agree about. And when we actually do that, we found there's an enormous amount of agreement in communities about these ideas that we just heard about, the idea of choice, for example, and how we grow. Just to give you an example, would you rather live in a neighborhood where your children have to be driven to school, or would you rather live in a neighborhood where you could drive them to school if you wanted to, or they could walk to school, or they could ride a bicycle to school, or maybe they could take public transportation to school? Which one provides more choices? Now, a lot of times people think this is what sustainability is about, and this is part of sustainability. And I spent a lot of my time working on these kind of things, renewable energy and solar power and wind turbines and electric cars and green roofs and green buildings, etc. But sustainability is about a lot more than technology. If you look up the definition of sustainable in the dictionary, you will find that it means enduring. A sustainable community, ladies and gentlemen, is a place of enduring value. And in fact, in ancient Athens, the city leaders of that great city used to take an oath of office to leave Athens not less, but greater, more beautiful, and prosperous than it was left to them. And I believe that's our challenge here in Delaware as well. How do we leave our communities not less, but more beautiful, prosperous than it was left to us? So at ULI, we spend a lot of our time doing research on sort of the real estate paradigm and how that real estate paradigm is changing in America and how many changes in American society are affecting the real estate paradigm. And so you say, well, what's changing? Well, lots of things are changing very fast. Things like demographics and technology and the global economy and consumer attitudes and market trends and energy prices and the weather. Yeah, you have no control over really any of those things. And so really when you think about planning, community planning, really there's only two kinds of planning in America today. There's two kinds of change in America today. There's unplanned change and there's planned change. Abraham Lincoln used to say the best way to predict the future of your community is to create it yourself. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to plan for the future this morning, but let's start off by talking about some of these changes that are occurring. Let's talk about the economy. Richard Florida, who wrote the Creative Class, has got a new book out now called The Great Reset. And he says how we live, work, shop, and get around is changing because of the changing economy. And the communities that embrace the future will prosper. Those that do not will decline. He also says a very interesting thing about development. He says every era or epoch of capitalism has had its own spatial fix. Its own spatial fix. He says in the agrarian era, it was 40 acres and a mule. And in the consumer industrial era, it was sprawl. But in the post-industrial era, it is towns and cities and neighborhoods. As I'll talk about in a few minutes, it's all about the velocity of ideas and connecting with creative people and institutions. And also the economic development model for our communities has changing. The old model, it was about cheap land and cheap gas and low-cost positioning. It was about shotgun recruitment. It was always about chasing and focusing on what you did not have, as opposed to the new model, which is really about laser recruitment, high-value positioning. It's about focusing on what you do have, existing businesses and your current assets. And oh, by the way, in the new world economy, the most important infrastructure investment, it is not roads, it is education. Education. We believe that communities and regions are in a new global competition to attract and retain talented workers who are choosing where to live first and then figuring out their job situations later. There's a big sort going on in America. When I graduated from college graduates were kind of evenly distributed throughout the United States based on population density. We had pretty much the same percentage pretty much everywhere. That is no longer true, ladies and gentlemen. College graduates are clustering in certain communities. Washington, Raleigh, Austin, San Jose, Seattle, Denver, etc. In the Washington metropolitan area, 47% of our residents have a college degree, 47%. You go to West Virginia, it's 18%. You go to Las Vegas, it's 19%. Turns out the young people want to go where the jobs are, and the jobs want to go where the young people are, and the young people want to go where the action is, and they want to be in the middle of the action as well. So in the new global competition, it's about how to attract and retain talented workers. But another big change is population growth. Our country is the fastest growing industrialized nation on earth. We're growing way faster than almost any European country. We're going to add another 100 million people by 2050. And so a real quick question for all of us is, where do we put these people? And where do we put the jobs that come with them? And where do we put all the new housing units that we're going to build, et cetera, et cetera? And then we need to think about the demographic shifts in American life. America's getting younger, it's getting older, it's getting more diverse. We have more single people living alone. We have people getting married later, if at all. Right now in America, we have 27 million women living alone. Do you think they want to live in a large lot subdivision, a 5-acre lot that's, too big to mow but too small to farm? Well, it turns out they tell us no, they do not. In fact, we have a huge oversupply of large lot subdivisions and an undersupply of multifamily housing, small lot development, attached housing, and so on and so forth. And what about technology? Yes, we're seeing the death of distance. People can do business anywhere in America. Most new jobs are in small and medium-sized businesses, healthcare and education. You know, my colleague Tom Murphy, the former mayor of Pittsburgh, talks about how they lost 150,000 manufacturing jobs there in 5 years. 50% of their entire manufacturing base. But guess what? Now jobs in healthcare and technology and medicine and education have grown by 120%. Did you know that in 60 of the 100 largest cities in America, the largest employer today is a university? A university. You know, so we need to start be thinking about how we leverage these kind of resources. Then let me tell you a little story. I was in northwest Pennsylvania last week in an area of the state called Pennsylvania Wilds. And they were talking about, you know, sort of how to create a branded identity and how to get people to come there and so on and so forth. And I told them a story about Foster Freese. Now, some of you may know who he is. He was a prominent supporter of Governor Romney during the recent campaign. But, you know, what he does is he runs a mutual fund company called the Brandywine Investment Group. And this is a family of mutual funds. And, you know, they were headquartered in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania for about 40 years. But Foster Freese liked to fly fish. So guess what? Every summer he would fly out to Jackson, Wyoming to go fly fishing. He'd stay for a couple of weeks, and then one day he's stuck in traffic on the Schuylkill Expressway outside of Philadelphia, and all of a sudden a light bulb goes on in his mind, and he says, hey, you know, I can run a mutual fund company anywhere in the world. So he picked up his entire company and moved it into downtown Jackson, Wyoming. That's now the largest private sector employer in Jackson, Wyoming. It's there for one reason. It's called access to outdoor recreation. You know, who would have thought that things like scenic beauty, small town atmosphere, outdoor recreation would have anything to do with economic development? But today they do in the world that we live in now. And then think about how consumer attitudes are changing. Think about young people and how they shop and how they work and how they move around. For the first time in American history, young people are not buying cars at the rate their parents did. Turns out a lot of them see a car as something that ties them down. They have more flexibility. This has given us birth to the boom in bicycling in America. That's the fastest growing form of transportation today. Come to Washington or New York or, you know, any big city, and you'll just be blown away by the thousands of young people riding around on bicycles. And then how about market trends like green buildings? Let me ask you this. How'd you like to build the last non-green office building in America? It turns out that green is becoming synonymous with Class A, and if you're not building green, you'll be considered to be building substandard. Virtually every major new building in America in the future will be a green building. And one of the reasons is because the costs have come way down as experience has gone way up. What do I mean by that? Well, in the year 2000, we had 500 LEED certified professionals in America. By the year 2010, we had 143,000 LEED certified professionals. And we have better products and better materials. And now we take an integrative approach to design. So now it costs almost no more to build a green building than to build a standard building. So the market is changing. But here in Delaware and a lot of places in the Mid-Atlantic, you know, we've done a pretty good job of saving some of the landmarks of our communities. But I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we've done a lot less good job of saving the landscape that gives those landmarks their larger sense of meaning. And while we've been cleaning up air and water quality, cleaning up air and water, yes, the air in Delaware is cleaner and the water is by and large cleaner, but while we've been cleaning up our air and water pollution, we've simultaneously been losing our sense of place. I mean, if I were to take you up tomorrow morning and then just drop you along a road outside of most American cities, you wouldn't have any idea where you were because it all looks exactly the same. I mean, where is this? Albany, Allentown, Providence, Pittsburgh, Wilmington, or Washington? Who can tell? You know, as Wallace Stegner, the great American writer, once said, he said, quote, "If you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are." And by that, I think he meant that everybody in this room has a fundamental need for a sense of orientation, for a sense of roots, for a sense of place. Sense of place. What do I mean by that? Well, a couple things. First, it's what makes your hometown different from my hometown. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, We believe that sense of place is explicitly that which makes our physical surroundings worth caring about. That which makes our physical surroundings worth caring about. And for all the improvements in cleaner air and cleaner water, better roads, faster computers, whatever, people still say, is this all there is? Can't our communities be more distinctive, more livable, more beautiful? Can't we have more connection with nature and the outdoors? So let's think about development for a few minutes and talk about some of the key elements of development, what we call the patterns of development. Where do you put it? How do you arrange it? And what does it look like? You know, I would say that the first principle of better development is figuring out where you should not develop. You know, there are some places that are simply better for development than other places. And that principle applies at every scale, from the parcel or site scale to the neighborhood scale to the regional scale. Tell you something funny about those houses, guess what? They're all gone now. Because, you know, building out in front of the dune lines at the beach, not really the smartest thing in the world to do, or maybe building in a floodplain. You know, it's interesting now that we're finally figuring out the 100-year floods are starting to come every 2 or 3 years. So it becomes even more important going forward to think about where we are building things. And, you know, I would suggest to you that every community in Delaware needs a long-range conservation plan, just like you have a long-range transportation plan. And who is that good for? Well, it's good for business, it's good for developers, it's good for local government, it's good for all of us because it provides predictability and certainty about the future. You know, it's kind of like this. If you're driving down the interstate, you know, at 70 miles an hour and you hit a fog bank, what are you going to do? You're going to try to slam the brakes on because you can't see where you're going. Well, that is exactly what the American public wanted to do with development when they couldn't see what the future looked like. If you could actually agree ahead of time, community by community, at what places are worth preserving, then it becomes easier to facilitate and encourage development in those places where you want it. You know, if people think all developed land is up for grabs everywhere, somebody will fight every development everywhere. So think about having a long-range conservation plan. Let's also think about how we arrange development. You know, let's talk about an example. This is Chesapeake City, Maryland. It's a town not very far from here. It's on the Eastern Shore. It's in Cecil County, Maryland. Chesapeake City has a lot in common with towns all over America and certainly all over Delaware. You know, it had an edge and a center. It had a mix of uses and housing types. It was walkable and pedestrian friendly. It was architecturally coherent and interesting. Had a strong sense of community and a wonderful sense of place. And ladies and gentlemen, this was the model for development in America for 300 years. We simply called it a town. And then by 1950, we decided we needed a new model for development. And we decided now we wanted to separate all of our uses. And now we started building communities with no edge and no center. And we put the $400,000 houses in this subdivision and the $200,000 houses in that subdivision. We put the townhouses over there. We put the shopping centers over there. Put the regional high school over there. And now, of course, you had to drive everywhere for everything. It's architecturally chaotic and ugly. There is no sense of place, and it is very difficult to have a sense of community in a town or community built around cars and parking lots. And so, you know, it's gotten so bad in many places that if you lived in that housing development behind the shopping center, you could not walk there. You would have to get in your car, and you have to drive out through the subdivision. You have to go down to the light down here, and then you have to wait for that light to change. Then you drive up to the main arterial, and then you have to wait for the light to change there. Then you have to drive down to the front of the shopping center, and you have to wait for the light to change there. Then you drive into the shopping center, and 10 minutes later, you'd be 50 feet from where you started. You know, this is not a very sustainable model, particularly thinking about the future. And what about energy prices? Yes, we are finally producing more energy in North America. We are drilling more and importing less. But guess what? Energy prices are set on a worldwide market. And so do you think that the long-term trend for energy prices in America is just to keep going down? And if you think that, let me say a couple words to you. China, India, Brazil. Think about rising demand. Think about the volatility of the worldwide markets. Wouldn't we like to have some choices to driving everywhere for everything? And then, of course, because we've created this new paradigm, now we can't afford it anymore. Now we have this enormous infrastructure deficit in America. American Society of Civil Engineers says we're going to have to spend $2 trillion just to improve our existing system of roads and bridges and so on and so forth. But guess what? We haven't raised the federal gas tax since 1993. You know, Americans, want the best of everything, but we're just not willing to pay for anything. We don't want to raise taxes. No, I get that, but we don't want to have tolls. We don't want to have user fees. We don't want any of those things. But we want the best roads. Well, perhaps we ought to think about, it's like the least expensive power plant that you could build is the one that you don't have to build. It's where things like energy efficiency come in. And if you didn't have to drive everywhere for everything, you could take shorter trips or fewer trips. Well, there's another way we could think about things. So this raises this question is, do we have alternatives to sprawl that are more attractive, more efficient, more profitable? And the answer is yes, absolutely. We've been, for about 40 years, we've done this report at the Urban Land Institute called Emerging Trends in Real Estate. And we look at the best markets for real estate in America, and then we also look at the best product types for real estate in America. If you looked at our early reports, they would tell you that the best development opportunity was things like a strip shopping center with a grocery store anchor, or perhaps a self-storage facility. Not anymore. You look at the last 10 years of reports, you know what it talks about? It talks about infill development, transit-oriented development, mixed-use development. The future is all about, basically going back to the past. It's about building real places once again. Now, I understand that, most Americans say they don't like too much sprawl, but they also don't like too much density. So, what do we do? Kind of how do you have one without the other? Well, let's talk about that. We think there are a couple of keys to density. Number one, high-quality design. Number two, access to green space. Number three, compensating amenity. Number four, more choices in ways to get around. Number five, you don't need density everywhere. You only need it in a few places. Show you a couple of examples of each. Compact can be incredibly attractive and incredibly valuable, and also inherently more livable. And compact design has to come with compensating amenities. You can't just take more look-alike houses and stick them closer together and expect everybody to like that. And of course, all the new houses we've been building for years, they're all tan, beige, putty, and taupe. And they got a big 2-car garage sticking out front that says cars live here, not people. So you got to build communities that are the best-looking communities, that have amenities and so on. And then density does not demand high-rises. Let me give you an example. There's 4 new condo towers in Las Vegas. That has a net density of 37.5 units per acre. Well, check out the French Quarter in New Orleans. That has almost 39 units an acre. Which one you like better? It's not about, it's about how you arrange it. It's about the design, et cetera, et cetera. And then think about value. Here's kind of what we've been doing on the site, on the left. And let me show you Alexandria, Virginia, Old Town Alexandria. Almost 20 units an acre, 18.9 units per acre on average in Old Town Alexandria. By the way, all the houses over there cost at least $1 million, and they're all 150 years old. Do you think people would pay $1 million for a 150-year-old home because they like to do home repair? Is that why people are buying houses in Alexandria and Georgetown and places like that? No. It's because charm sells. Charm has value. Old Town Alexandria is one of the most charming, walkable, and beautiful neighborhoods on the planet Earth. You have neighborhoods like that right here in Delaware. How about like on the Green in Dover, or how about, Newcastle, or how about, almost any of the parts of, how about Lewis, where I have a home? It turns out people will pay a lot of money to live in a place they can actually walk to something. And then, of course, you don't need density everywhere. The classic example is Arlington County, Virginia, where they basically decided to put all their density on top of what's called Wilson Boulevard, and 30 years ago it was a low-density crapola strip lined with Jiffy Lubes and used car lots. And today it is an unbelievable urban place. And guess what? They get 65% of their tax revenue from 10% of their land. And 3 blocks away, they have beautiful single-family neighborhoods. So the density is like where they need it, on top of their transit stops. You don't need density everywhere, only certain places. And let's talk about how the paradigm is changing. This is the commercial paradigm. For years. It was like coming soon, strip malls. And I want to tell you, this paradigm is coming to an end. Ladies and gentlemen, strip retail is retail for the last century. The future belongs to downtowns and main streets and town centers and mixed-use development. Let's talk about why. Number one, we're overbuilt on the Strip. I'm going to go through each of these in turn. Retail is rediscovering our cities and towns. The suburbs are being redesigned. Traffic congestion, fuel prices, and auto-oriented design are undermining the Strip. Consumers favor places with character. E-commerce means fewer and smaller stores, and the economy is completely restructuring the retail landscape. Let's talk about what we did for years. We saw a 10-fold increase in retail space in America from 1960 to 2000. We went from 4 square feet per person to over 38 square feet per person. You know, in the U.S., we have double the retail space per person of any European country. And if the recession hasn't taught us anything else, it taught us that we were overstored. So we have almost 1 billion square feet of empty retail space, mostly in empty big box stores out on the Strip. Just to give an example, Chicago right now, Metro Chicago has 175 empty big box stores, totaling almost 9 million square feet of vacant space. Drive up and down US 13 and check out the empty stores. Okay? You know, and part of the reason for this is retail space grew 5 to 6 times faster than retail sales. So we kept cannibalizing. We'd open, this shopping center, then the next one would go out of business, and so on and so forth. And then, think about how we configured this space. In 1960, if you had 200,000 square feet of retail space, it was in a 4-story building on a downtown street. It was accessible by transit, and we called it a department store. And then by 1980, if you had 200,000 square feet of retail space, it was in a single-story building, and the building covered about 3 acres. It was surrounded by 12 to 20 acres of parking. We called it a Walmart. Okay? It turns out that paradigm is completely changing. This is, of course, one of the reasons why. It's because all of this kind of development just reinforced the need to drive everywhere. So, this is what Chris Lineberger says. He says the largest retail trend of the next generation will be the conversion of dead or dying strip commercial centers in the suburbs into walkable urban places. And it has already started in America, and you can see it very prominently if you come to Washington or almost any other big city. Did you know that the majority of new housing today in Los Angeles County, California, is being built on commercially zoned land? Being built along the Ventura Boulevards of Los Angeles. Let me show you what I consider to be a metaphor for America and a preview of the future. Welcome to Rockville, Maryland, the county seat of Montgomery County outside of Washington. In 1970, in their infinite wisdom, they decided to tear down almost their entire downtown. And they replaced it with this lovely 200-store mall that you see in the background behind this parking lot. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Now they've torn the mall down and put the downtown back. And this is just one of the 43 walkable mixed-use places in the greater Washington area. That's right, 43 walkable mixed-use places. Let me give you another example, a famous example. How about Tysons Corner, Virginia? This was America's first edge city. It is the 10th largest central business district in America. It has 3 rush hours a day. It has a morning rush hour, it has an evening rush hour, it has a lunch hour rush hour, because you can't walk to anything for lunch. But guess what? They just won the highest award the American Planning Association gives out, called the Daniel Burnham Award, for passing a new comprehensive plan that is, over the next 20 years, going to turn Tysons Corner into the first edge city that becomes a walkable mixed-use downtown, served by 4 transit stops, which are under construction right as we speak. They're actually putting in a street grid and building sidewalks. Well, there's a concept. like sidewalks in Tyson's Corner. Who'd have thought? Ladies and gentlemen, a parking lot is a terrible thing to waste. This is the new promised land in America. Yeah, that's right. These grayfield sites, like you have thousands of here in Delaware, large, flat, well-drained sites on major infrastructure, 4-lane highways. You know, we can transform these places, and we can turn a NIMBY, a person who says not in my backyard, to a YIMBY who wants to say, yes, do that in my backyard, because that's going to improve the place I live. So, you know, we can go from a Best Buy like this in a spread-out, single-use, drive-only building to a Best Buy like this in a compact, mixed-use, walkable, or drivable building. And, you know, I understand everybody doesn't want to sleep upstairs and shop downstairs. Yeah, but a lot of people do. Like some of the 75% of American households who do not have school-aged children. That's people like me, empty nesters, retirees, young professionals, you know, singles living alone, et cetera, et cetera. Once again, we have an oversupply of large lot housing and an undersupply of mixed-use housing, attached housing, multifamily housing, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to show you how easy mixed-use can be even in a small town. Welcome to Herndon, Virginia. Here's a new Dairy Queen with a dentist office upstairs. How appropriate. And think about this, you know, would you rather live next door to a house full of out-of-control teenagers, or would you rather live next door to a dentist office? Which one would have more impact on your quiet enjoyment of your property? It's not about the use, it's about the impact of the use. Let's talk about how retail is rediscovering our cities. You know, there's only one place in America with more spending power than stores to spend it in. It's called in our downtowns. And so all of a sudden, retail is rediscovering all our cities. And also, big business is rediscovering cities. And, you know, here's the paradigm we used to have. You know, in 1992, Sears decided to move out of the landmark, iconic Sears Tower and move to an office park outside of Chicago in a place called Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Now, guess what? They've just moved back into downtown Chicago. And this is happening all over the country. This is was the headquarters until about 6 months ago for Red Hat. That's the second largest business software company in America after Oracle. They've just moved from that suburban office park back into downtown Raleigh. And this is just a list of a few of the companies that have moved back into downtowns in just the last year or so. How about companies like Living Social and Facebook and Zappos? You know, and so Quicken Loans moved 5,000 employees back into downtown Detroit. Who'd have thought? You know, and then guess what? For the first time in 50 years, a majority of American cities are growing faster than our suburbs. For the first time in 50 years. Not every city, certainly, but even the cities that aren't growing, like St. Louis, what we're finding is a huge influx into the downtowns and downtown adjacent neighborhoods, the most urban parts of those cities. Washington, D.C. is a great example of this transformation. We had 16,000 young people move into Washington the last year. Every neighborhood is being redone. You know, we went from 670,000 people down to 500,000. Now we're back up to almost 600,000. You know, it's going on lots of places. And then, you know, the retailers are racing to basically move into the city, and they're willing to change all of their rules to do it. Going into multi-story buildings, go into mixed-use buildings, go into smaller footprint buildings, putting the parking underground or on the roof. And so let's look at the shape of big box retailers. Yeah, they're going up instead of out. They're going back into buildings like what we used to call a department store. Here's the new Target in downtown Washington on 14th Street. Yeah, it's in a 4-story building. Okay, you know, what's interesting about that, you know, the big thing for the big box stores was always, well, how do we get the shopping carts up and down? Well, you know, we did figure out how to put a man on the moon in America. You could probably figure out how to get the shopping carts up and down. If you've been to a multi-story big box, you know that there's an escalator for your shopping cart. It goes right down next to you. And, you know, let me show you what the future looks like. Here's the world headquarters for Target in downtown Minneapolis, Minnesota. The first 2 floors are Target. The top 2 floors are their corporate headquarters. How about this one? This is a new Target in downtown Stamford, Connecticut. It's right on the sidewalk. 5-story building. First floor is locally owned retail. The next 2 floors are Target. The top 2 floors are parking. Who would know? Or let's talk about the first Walmart that would be built in Washington, D.C. It's in a 5-story building on New Jersey Avenue, Northwest. It has 315 apartments on top. It has a green vegetative roof. The parking is underground. Let me show you the first Walmart in America where people will be living upstairs and shopping downstairs. It's under construction right now once again, in Tyson's Corner, Virginia. Who'd have thought that somebody could live above a Walmart? You know, they're even giving new life to old buildings. We have all these abandoned department stores all over the country. Well, a lot of them are coming back to life. Here's the Carson Prairie Scott building in downtown Chicago, recently restored by Target, who moved back into this National Historic Landmark building. They did the same thing at the abandoned Galleria department store in Portland, Oregon. They did the same thing in the abandoned Sears building in downtown San Francisco, on and on and on. You know, here's the new Home Depot in New York City. You know, and people said to me, you know, when they saw this picture, well, how do you get your lumber home? Well, guess what? They deliver. Okay, well, there's a concept. They deliver. How about this? E-commerce means fewer and smaller stores. The nation's healthiest retailer is not Walmart. It is not Best Buy. It is not Costco. It is Amazon. E-commerce means the downsizing or disappearance of many chain stores. And by the way, you know, what happened was the big box stores put all the locally owned businesses out of stores. Now the e-commerce is putting the big box stores out of business. Who invented the superstore concept? Well, it's a company called Staples. Well, guess what? They're now the second largest online retailer in the world. So they are racing to downsize all their stores from 40,000 square feet to 5,000 square feet. Well, at 5,000 square feet, you can put it right back downtown again. And this is what's starting to happen, and particularly because people are starting to live in downtowns again and work in downtowns again. And then, you know, we did a forum on the future of strip development in America at the Urban Land Institute. We asked our panelists, well, what do you guys think are the distinguishing characteristics of suburban strips in America? You know what they said? This is real estate people. They said, well, they're ugly and congested. Well, hey, try running a successful marketing campaign around that slogan. Hey, shop here. We're both ugly and congested. Come on down. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is not sustainable, particularly if you have an alternative to it. Now, let me give you an example of this. Let me tell you about two Barnes & Noble bookstores. One is on Rockville Pike. That is the busiest road in the state of Maryland. It has the highest traffic count in Maryland. It's our super strip outside of Washington. It has a big parking lot out in front. Now, if you drive down Rockville Pike, if you get down into Bethesda, the name of the street changes to Wisconsin Avenue. Then you turn 2 blocks off Wisconsin Avenue once you get into Bethesda, and you'll find another Barnes & Noble's bookstore. It is sitting on the sidewalk in a 3-story building. There is no parking in front of that building. Which one makes more money? The one on the busiest road in Maryland with a big parking lot in front, or the one in downtown Bethesda with no parking lot in front? Well, it turns out the one in downtown Bethesda makes 20% more than the one on the busiest road in Maryland. Well, how does that work? Well, first of all, think about it. How can you get to the one in Rockville Pike? There's only one way to get there. It's called drive your car. How can you get to the one in downtown Bethesda? It turns out there's 4 ways to get there. You can drive your car there, and there's lots of parking in the neighborhood, including a 5-story parking deck behind the Barnes & Noble. It's surrounded by stores on all sides. So you can actually drive there, or you could take the train there because there's a metro stop a block away, or you could ride your bicycle there because there's something called the Capitol Crescent Bike Trail across the streets, an abandoned railroad line, went from the old power plant in Georgetown out through downtown Bethesda into Silver Spring. It's directly across the street from the Barnes & Noble. Or you can walk to the Barnes & Noble in Bethesda because thousands of people live within a 10-minute walk. So 4 ways to get to one store, only 1 way to get to the other. And what's the other big difference? It's what we call the place-making dividend. What is that? It's what's in real estate means that people stay longer, spend more money, and come back more often to places that attract their affection. How many people do you think feel affectionate about the strips of Delaware? Oh, I love the strip. I'm just going to go hang out there. No one goes to hang out there except the skateboarders, maybe. People go to buy what they want, and they leave. So think about trying to create communities that have a place-making dividend. It turns out the people who live in those communities also drive less, about 30% less, because the trips are shorter or fewer. We did a comparison study between Bethesda and Germantown, Maryland. Turns out in Gaithersburg, 90% of everybody at lunchtime to run errands, to go shopping, or to go to lunch has to get in their car. But in downtown Bethesda, a mixed-use, complete community, almost 90% of the people walk or take transit to go to lunch, go shopping, or to run errands, because you can. All right, let's talk about what development looks like. Community character matters, ladies and gentlemen. You know, as Mark Twain said, we take stock of a city like we take stock of a man. The clothes or appearance are the externals by which we judge. You know, another way, here's what the National Association of Realtors, thank you very much, Mr. Joe Molinaro, who's sitting in our audience today. A community's appeal drives its economic prosperity. You know, think about this. Let's talk about our community's front door, its gateway. And just like with meeting a person, a good first impression is important, and a bad first impression is hard to change. Do you think you'd rather visit a town like Franklin, Tennessee, or Midfield, Alabama? Which one looks more like a community with a sense of pride and a sense of place? Which one looks more like a community you would rather spend time or money in? Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't remember anything else I say this morning, remember this. The image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. The image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that every single day in America, people make decisions about where to live, where to invest, where to vacation, where to retire, based on what our communities look like. What they look like. Let me give you a couple of examples. This is the official travel guide for the state of Oregon. You know, let's talk about tourism. It is the biggest industry in the world. It's the first, second, or third largest industry in every American state. You know, this is their slogan in Oregon. It says, Oregon, things look different here. Can you imagine Delaware having a tourism brochure that said, Delaware, things look the same here? Well, of course not. Because what is tourism? Tourism is about visiting places that are different, unusual, and unique. The more any town in Delaware comes to look just like every place else in America, the less reason there is to go there. On the other hand, the more you do to enhance the unique character of the community, whether that's natural or cultural, architectural, what have you, the more people want to go there, because that's exactly what tourism is. If every place was just like every place else, there'd be no reason to go any place. The image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. You know, there's a new book out by the World Bank called The Economics of Uniqueness. They make the point that sameness is a minus in the world we live in today. It is not a plus. If you can't differentiate Delaware and Delaware's communities from any other place, you will have no competitive advantage. Joe Courtwright, who used to run a group called CEO for Cities, put it this way. He says, the unique characteristics of place may be the only truly defensible source of a competitive advantage for communities and regions. We think there's 4 keys to economic development going forward: talent, innovation, connectivity. Now, connectivity is not just about, road connectivity. It's about connectivity to global markets, internet connectivity, connectivity to creative people and organizations. But the 4th thing is distinctiveness. It's about building on what makes you unique. And I know some people say, well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You really think so? You think this scenic view has more value, or do you think this scenic view has more value? Let me tell you what some of the leading real estate appraisers in America say about this topic. They say, quote, you can put a dollar value on a view. Scenic landscapes are an economic asset, not just because you and I think they're nice, but because other people are willing to pay to see the view and to experience the unique character of a place. They go on to say, quote, housing, hotels, offices with scenic views always command premium prices. The better the view, the higher the price. I mean, think about it. It's really a very simple concept if you consider it. You go to the beach in the summer. You rent a hotel room with a view of the ocean, and you will pay more for that room than the exact same room on the other side of the hotel. What are you paying for? Ladies and gentlemen, the scenic landscapes of Delaware have quantifiable economic value, which is just one of the reasons why some of these are worth preserving. Now, a lot of our guys have figured this out, a lot of our members. Way back in 1994, the National Association of Home Builders was trying to figure out, well, what features in a new house would add value to a home more than any other thing? Was it like the kitchen, the garage, type of appliances, or what? Here's what they found. They found, quote, The surrounding environment is the single most important factor affecting the market value of a home. The surrounding environment. They went on to say, quote, a mountain vista or proximity to a park, water or green space affects the value of a home more than the size of the house, the number of rooms, the type of appliances, or even the presence of a swimming pool. It's what the realtors like to call location, location, location. You know, and also green space creates value, which is one of those amenities that people like in these complete communities. And there are literally hundreds of studies that show how green space creates value, but let me just show you a classic example. Where's the most valuable land in New York? Well, there it is. It's the land next to Central Park. But you know, here's kind of what we've done for years. We have 16,000 golf course developments in America, and the reason we have 16,000 golf course developments is because the developers figured out they could charge a lot premium for a house that was next to a golf course than the same house that wasn't next to a golf course. And that lot premium could be anywhere from 10 to 25%. Same house, one next to golf course, but one wasn't. But guess what? Did you know that the vast majority of buyers in golf course developments in America do not play golf? That's right. Philadelphia Inquirer did a study of every golf course development in eastern Pennsylvania. Guess what they found? 80% of the buyers did not play golf. So they interviewed them. They said, well, why'd you buy the house there? They said, oh, we like the view across the fairway. We like to live next to protected open space. Well, like, duh. What does it cost to build a golf course? Millions of dollars. What does it cost to maintain a golf course? Millions of dollars. What does it cost to leave the green space alone in the first place? Almost nothing. And so a huge and growing number of developers are starting to realize that green space can add value to housing just the same way that golf courses can. And in fact, they're starting to build golf course developments without the golf course. And what can you do here? Well, you can walk your dog, you can throw a frisbee, you can play ball, you can do anything you want. And what can you do on a golf course? You can play golf. And by the way, what is the most popular form of outdoor recreation in America and in Delaware? It's called walking for pleasure. Number one. You know, it's interesting about walking. You know, it's a way to give you more bang for the buck with lower expenditures, create communities where you can walk. I think this is a state that has a tremendous opportunity to create more walkable communities. You know, this is an interesting study. You know, we now have 4,200 specialty bike shops in America. Most people buy bikes at like a, you know, Best Buy, I mean not Best Buy, but like a Sports Authority or a Walmart or something like that. But the vast majority of income for bicycle sales goes to these specialty shops. They're the ones that sell the expensive bike stores. And in fact, we're selling more bikes than cars in America today. But one of the things that's very interesting about bicycles is dealers are not evenly distributed throughout the United States based on population density. Car dealers are. Bicycle dealers are disproportionately located in a few communities. Those are called communities where you can actually ride a bike. So let me show you. I did a study some years ago, 1996, at the opening of the Atlanta Olympics. We were looking at comparing cities all across the country. And we found this very interesting thing, that Atlanta had 3 million people and only 28 bicycle dealers. Denver had only 2 million people, but 149 bicycle dealers. What was the difference? The difference was in 1996, Denver then had 200 miles of paved off-road bike trail, and Atlanta had less than 10. Turns out, bikes, you know, you won't ride a bike unless there's somewhere to ride the bike. You know, it turns out in Portland, which now has a 6% mode share for commuting by bicycle, has built a 300-mile network of bike trails, bike lanes, and bikeways for $60 million. 6% mode share. $60 million, ladies and gentlemen, is about the cost of 1 mile of urban freeway. How'd you like to do that and get a 6% mode share? Okay, I want to end by talking briefly about what I consider to be the secrets of successful communities. How do we differentiate some communities from other communities? We have over 25,000 incorporated communities in America. We have over 3,100 counties. How many of these places can truly be considered successful? Well, I can tell you they haven't been in this business for 35 years plus. I think that there's some things that clearly differentiate successful communities from unsuccessful communities. And first and foremost, successful communities have a vision for the future. Now, some people might call that a plan for the future, and I understand that planning is a dirty word in some places in America. Certainly was where I grew up in Alabama. And, you know, people would say to me, I don't like planning. And I say, okay, well, then you tell me the name of any successful organization, institution, corporation, or community that doesn't plan for the future. Failing to plan simply means planning to fail. As the book of Proverbs says, without vision, the people will perish. You know, my dad used to tell me the story of Oliver Wendell Holmes. He was America's longest-serving Supreme Court justice. The story goes he's on a train in the South in the 1930s, and the conductor's coming along, and he's collecting the tickets, and he gets to Justice Holmes, he says, "Ticket, please." And the justice goes in his pocket, and he's looking for his ticket, and he can't find it. And the conductor recognizes him because he's a very famous guy. He's a U.S. Supreme Court justice, says, "Hey, don't worry about it. I don't need your ticket. I know who you are." And he goes, No, I have to have it." He starts going to his briefcase. He's pulling out all his papers. And the conductor says again, "Really, I don't need your ticket." And Justice Holmes keeps looking. And he's like got his suitcase out, and he's pulling stuff out of his suitcase. And the conductor for the third time says, "Please, sir, really, I don't need your ticket." And Justice Holmes turns to him and says, "Young man, you don't understand. I don't know where to get off this train." And of course, the moral of the story is if you don't care where you're going, it simply doesn't matter what train you take. And successful communities always build their plans, whether it's a land use plan, an economic development plan, a tourism plan, what have you, around the enhancement of their existing assets. And successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives, not just regulation. I didn't say I'm against regulation. Prevents bad things from happening, sets a minimum standard of conduct, but you got to use carrots, not just sticks. Successful communities pick and choose among development proposals. Ladies and gentlemen, all development is not created equal. Some development will make your community a better place to live in, to look at, to work in, to visit. Some won't. The biggest impediment to better development in small towns in America is a fear of saying no to anything. Well, if you're afraid to say no to anything, well, then you'll get the worst of everything. Communities that set no standards or low standards will compete to the bottom. Communities that set high standards compete to the top. And those communities cooperate with their neighbors for mutual benefit. It's not just about the county or the town, it's about the region. It's about working in partnership with others, like the State Office of Planning, for example. Successful communities consider what they look like. Successful communities have strong leaders and committed citizens. Let me show you a couple of quick examples. Communities have used these ideas. Welcome to Chattanooga, Tennessee. It used to be voted the most polluted city in America. It was routinely referred to as a patch of rust in the Sun Belt. Well, today it's known as an international model for community revitalization. And it all began with a vision for the future. And they decided to focus on two big things: downtown, because that's the heart and soul of any community, and the Tennessee River, because that was their most important natural asset. And this was what all of downtown Chattanooga used to look like. It was one boarded up building after another. And they decided to take that one building and restore it. They didn't take the biggest project first, they took the smallest project first, because they realized that nothing succeeds like success. And so people said, "How'd you do that?" And then other people got interested, and then they did bigger projects like this. This is the Outlet Mall in Chattanooga. It's downtown and restored warehouse buildings. And then they said, we have this beautiful river. That's the Tennessee River Gorge, 15 minutes from downtown Chattanooga. All that land was in private ownership, so they decided to set up a land trust called the Tennessee River Gorge Trust. And all the landowners there, now they saved their view and got a tax break too. Now all that land's under conservation easement. Then they decided to build a park along the Tennessee River, both sides, 5 miles long. Original price tag, $25 million. That's a big number for a small city. But Chattanooga realized something incredibly important. They realized how much something costs is not the most important question. It's the second most important question. What's the most important question facing any community in Delaware? It is, what should we do? What should we do? And money almost always will follow good ideas if they come out of a consensus building process. And they did that. And guess what? They built that park. And that $25 million investment has leveraged $2 billion in adjacent private investment. $2 billion. And because they had a vision for the future, they were able to do some pretty remarkable things. They had the Walnut Street Bridge in downtown Chattanooga. Tennessee DOT was going to tear it down. They'd set aside about $4.5 million to demolish that bridge. But Chattanooga said, "No, we have a better idea. You give us the same money you were going to use to tear it down, let us use it to turn it into the nation's longest pedestrian bridge that now connects one side of the Tennessee River with the other side." Key lesson learned: how much something costs is the second most important question. Small town example. Welcome to Susan City, California. 1990, it was voted the worst place to live in Northern California. This was their city hall. It was in 2 double-wide trailers. This was the only city hall in California you had to register with the Department of Motor Vehicles. And, public buildings should set the standard in a community. And they always did before World War II. They were always our most beautiful buildings, whether it was the courthouse, the library, the public school, what have you. And they were always downtown. And then in about 1950, we decided that cheaper was better. It turns out what we've learned is cheaper is simply cheaper. And so what they said in Susan City was, why would anybody invest in a community that wouldn't invest in itself? So they said, we need to set the standard. So they built a new city hall right in that same spot. And guess what? 1 decade later, they were voted one of the best places to live in Northern California, but it all began with an investment in themselves. Successful communities inventory their assets, natural, cultural, human, economic, educational, what have you, and then they build their assets around the enhancement of their existing assets. Sometimes the assets are very obvious, like welcome to Jackson, Wyoming, world-class scenery, unparalleled wildlife resources. Welcome to Annapolis, unbelievable architectural legacy. And these communities have built all their plans around the enhancement of this legacy. But sometimes the assets of the community are not very obvious. Welcome to Lowell, Massachusetts. 1975, it was a dying industrial city. It had an unemployment rate of 27%. It had never seen a single tourist. It thought it had no assets. But what it had was abandoned textile mills, and it had visionary leadership. And they said, we could probably restore those. We could probably restore those mills, and now they've restored them all. And today, this is the Charleston, South Carolina of New England. Today, that place gets 1 million tourists a year. Today, it has an unemployment rate equal to the national average. Began with a vision, an inventory of their assets. Successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives. Why do we educate? We educate in order to reduce the need to regulate. Why do we educate? We educate because people won't embrace what they don't understand. We educate because the citizens of Delaware have a right to choose the future, but to know what the choices are. We also need, as I said before, to use incentives. There's all kinds of different incentives, like a historic preservation tax credit. This is the Lone Star Brewery in San Antonio. It sat vacant for 25 years until they used a historic preservation tax credit, turned into this world-class museum of art. Successful communities pick and choose among development proposals. All development is not created equal. Successful communities have hometown heroes, people who are willing to work to see that whatever your vision is actually gets implemented. And I understand it is not always easy getting things done in America. Particularly in smaller communities, whatever you propose, there will always be the againers. There will be people who tell you, can't do it, won't work, costs too much, already tried it. But a pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, an optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. No is a powerful word in America, but what's a more powerful word? Yes. Yes, we can make Delaware a better place to live in, to look at, to work in, to visit. And I want to just conclude by saying a little bit about public leadership, which is incredibly important, but oftentimes so underappreciated. I love this quote from Monty Python, sort of sums up our view towards our elected officials. It says, quote, apart from sanitation, medicine, education, wine, public order, roads, irrigation, public health, and a freshwater system, what have the Romans ever done for us? Ladies and gentlemen, a vision counts, but implementation is priceless. Thank you so much for having me here this morning.